This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
I think the moral of the story is that the builders are continuing to build and ignoring the headlines. And I also think that a lot of founders are really focusing on value propositions that are cheaper, better, and faster with greener as a co-benefit rather than the main value driver.
Hi, everyone. We all know that no single investment strategy and no single asset class is going to fund the climate innovation we need all on its own. Moving real solutions forward takes multiple tools working together. That's why I've been long drawn to catalytic capital and blended finance, using philanthropy to unlock risk-taking and bring more investors along. That approach is at the heart of Elemental Impact and Earthshot Ventures, two organizations with a uniquely complementary model. Both were founded by Don Lippert. Elemental deploys philanthropic capital to de-risk and accelerate early climate solutions, while Earthshot brings venture capital to help some of the strongest of those solutions scale. Together, they create a pathway for climate innovations that might otherwise never get funded. In this episode, I'm joined by Don Lippert, along with Matt Logan, general partner at Earthshot Ventures. We talk about how Elemental and Earthshot got started, how they work together in practice, real examples of the climate solutions they're backing, a new and innovative investment structure they've pioneered, and their predictions for where climate investing is headed in 2026 and beyond. This conversation is part of a new deep dive series that we're starting with Elemental Impact, so stay tuned for more, and if you'd like to find or propose other series ideas, go to investedinclimate.com. Thanks for listening. Don and Matt, welcome to Invested in Climate.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Well, welcome. Great to have you both here. Don, we've been trying to do this for a long time, so fun to get to finally do it. And wow, what a year. We are recording this in late December 2025. We'll publish it in January, so naturally we'll reflect a bit on what's happened this year and look ahead a bit. We'll get into the details of what you're doing, but first, a quick temperature check. How are you guys feeling as we wrap up this year?
I'm feeling pretty energized, Jason. It's great to see you. So I'm always happy to talk to you. But I also think that 2025 has been, a lot of ups and downs. A lot of things slowed down, we hit the brakes, but also acceleration in a lot of interesting areas. So it was kind of a tale of both of those things happening in 2025. So every year we, at Elemental and Earthshot, we have a team meeting where we have one word that reflects how we feel about 2025 or encompasses 2025 and one word going to 2026. And my word this year for 2026 was Audacity. So I think this is about being bold and moving into 2026 with such conviction and clarity and strength, which is how we feel now across both Elemental and Earthshot, and sort of leaving the fear and uncertainty and the shock of what's happening behind as we move into the next year. So we've got a lot of energy.
Very cool. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, my year reflecting on, or my word of the year reflecting on 2025 was bullish. We made 6 new investments this year that we're really excited about that we can dig into later in the conversation. But at a high level, I think the moral of the story is that the builders are continuing to build and ignoring the headlines. And I also think that a lot of founders are really focusing on value propositions that are cheaper, better, and faster with greener as a co-benefit rather than the main value driver. And that's really always what we've been focused on at Earthshot. So increasingly that lens, I think, is the way that the best founders are starting companies. And so we've just found a lot of great opportunities in 2025.
Fantastic. Someone told me today that if for the Lunar New Year, the Chinese New Year, we've just entered, or we're leaving the year of the snake, entering the year of the horse. So moving from shedding a skin to a era of acceleration. Maybe that resonates with both of your comments. Dawn, you wear multiple hats in the world of climate innovation and finance, but primarily two big hats. You are the CEO and founder of Element Impact and founding partner of Earthshot Ventures. We'll let Matt get into the details of what makes Earthshot unique in a minute, but first help us set the stage. What are these organizations and why did you start them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we think of them as two organizations working quite closely together, and they're designed to be sister organizations where 1 + 1 = 3. So over 15 years ago, I started Elemental Impact. And Elemental is a nonprofit investor in climate. We've invested in about 160 companies so far. And the value of having a nonprofit investor that's funded by grants and philanthropy and government is that we can be right on the edge of climate innovation and fill gaps. So our mission is to invest in bold entrepreneurs who are doing things that are really important for the environment and climate, and then to also help build the ecosystem around that to maximize for climate impact and also for local impact. So that's what we're building at Elemental. And it's enabled us to be really creative, but also see amazing opportunities. So one of the things that we started seeing, especially around 2020 and 2021, is just this inflection point in the quality of entrepreneurs coming into climate. And many of them were coming across our desk, and we felt compelled to invest in them also for returns. And we had a lot of partners that were working with us specifically as donors at Elemental that wanted to invest with us for returns as well and to really see what we were seeing and benefit from that. So we had the opportunity to launch Earthshot Ventures. We had our first close in 2021 and started investing right away. And, we're entrepreneurs. So when we see an opportunity in the market that's really new in a new window, we go after that. So that's what we've been doing for many years at Elemental, is constantly iterating and going after the opportunity for the most impact in climate. How can we be the best nonprofit investor, the most catalytic nonprofit investor in the world? And then we're going after the opportunity we see in venture, which is how do we be part of the generational companies that are making a difference in climate and generate awesome returns and be one of the best venture funds in the world. So we have been able to design that in a way that really benefits both, and we see a lot of complementarity there.
Matt, let's turn to you and hear a bit about your background and how you came to start working with Dawn at Elemental and then eventually become one of the original folks founding Earthshot and be now a general partner.
Okay. Yeah, so I discovered venture capital in 2010 as an unpaid intern working for a clean tech, as we then called it, market research firm. My job was to enter information from startups that were trying to raise funding into their database. So it wasn't the most glamorous role, but it was a glimpse into what I thought would be the best job in the world, venture capital, getting to learn about new technologies, working with the smartest, most ambitious people, and getting to have real skin in the game about expressing where I think the future is heading. So I wanted to do this for a long time. In between then and now, I've been both an operator and an investor. I have tried to raise money unsuccessfully for a solar water heating startup, which helped me develop a lot of empathy for founders. I've also had more success raising money for a distributed energy storage company, both on the project finance and corporate equity side. That company was called Advanced Microgrid Solutions. We had a modest outcome, but we didn't really grow much while I was there, to be honest. Batteries were just too expensive at the time. And that really taught me that in startups, being early is basically the same thing as being wrong, which has been a big focus at Earthshot, really understanding the why now behind every company that we invest in. From there, I joined Elemental. I helped build out a corporate partnership team at Elemental, really tailoring Elemental's deal flow for corporate venture capital groups that were our partners. And then because of that background, I joined on with Mike and Dawn, building Earthshot from day one and helping to raise the first fund. So yeah, we've been working together since 2018 and held a first close on Earthshot in May of 2021.
It's pretty fun to work with a team this long, I'll say too. I mean, a lot of our Elemental and Earthshot team has been with us a long time, but it's nice. After about 8 years working together, there's not that many surprises left, Jason.
I bet. Matt, tell us more about Earthshot, its thesis, and what makes it unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, we're returns driven. We only invest in companies that are positive for the climate. But beyond that, we look to invest in the companies that we think have the highest return potential. We also think that climate is actually a much bigger category than many people think of. Pretty much every company has a climate impact, whether good or bad. So we're basically trying to amplify the positive side of that ledger. When you think about venture, it really consists of sourcing, picking, winning, and helping. So we could dive in on any of those that you're curious to. But where I spend a ton of my time is on sourcing, especially. We have a great network that we've developed over decades. And so we get a lot of network referrals, but I really spend a ton of time on outbound sourcing. So we've built this homebrewed CRM that ingests data signals from across the internet and enables us to identify companies and reach out and build relationships before they're even in the market fundraising necessarily. So, I mentioned we've invested in 6 companies this year, and actually 5 of those I sourced through cold outbound. So we're really looking to invest in the best companies in the world, not just the best companies that land in our inbox.
Don, Elemental and Earthshot are actually more than sister organizations. They're also partners, and Earthshot's revenue and carry helps fund Elemental. And there's, as I understand it, a service agreement between the organizations. Tell us a bit about how that works.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying about how do you set up organizations so that 1 + 1 = 3? And it's not just about sort of like finding and funding the best innovation. I think what we need in climate and sort of in the environmental movement in general is a lot more creativity about the kinds of organizations and structures that will break through. Because these are big, complex systems challenges. So we have to bring really creative, interesting systems solutions to them. So I think Elemental and Earthshot's kind of an example of that. Elemental is a very unusual nonprofit that we make investments and then recycle the proceeds back onto our balance sheet like sourdough, like starter dough for sourdough, right? So that's a pretty unusual, very unique setup. But we think it's a really interesting one because it enables us to be impact first and not subsidize investors. We also participate in the upside as the nonprofit. So when we were thinking about how to structure this for-profit and this sister organization, we wanted to think about what actually is the best outcome, and then how do we work with all the sort of lawyers and the structures to make that happen. And we thought what the best outcome is to actually align our teams on the success of portfolio companies across the whole platform. And so that's what we've been able to do across Elemental and Earthshot. Again, it's a pretty unique structure, but we found it to be really beneficial. And Matt talked about sourcing, picking, helping, winning. We see these 2 organizations able to help each other really across that spectrum. But maybe I'll just dive in on helping because, as Matt said, and he led our corporate partnership program before helping build Earthshot, Elemental as a nonprofit has a wide web of corporate relationships, customer relationships, and utility relationships, and big tech relationships, running innovation challenges with Google and Amazon and Microsoft and a bunch of different things going on there. And it's very helpful to have access to those relationships and customers for Earthshot. So we think about how we win deals is largely based on sort of networks, access to talent, access to investors, access to customers, and having both of these together provides greater surface area. But more broadly than that, it just is a way for us to innovate on the kinds of structures that will make a difference in climate.
I love the sourdough analogy. And I mean, in some ways, what you're doing is relevant to individuals with donor advised funds, right? Is that a lot of people don't realize that their donor advised fund can make venture investments and proceeds should just go back into their DAF. And you're using a nonprofit model to do exactly that. In some ways, just elevates that sort of opportunity.
Yeah, I guess that's exactly right. And what I will say is that I think philanthropy is having a real moment and will continue to have a moment sort of like going forward here. As the government has pulled back a lot from investing in these climate companies, there are these very severe market gaps that have emerged in terms of commercializing technology. So what we've seen over the last really 10 years is a rise in venture capital and early funding for technologies. Now we have a lot of those technologies working, but they're running into a brick wall as they try to get their first projects funded. And so, government has a role to play there. There's a real mismatch with most private capital, but philanthropy can be extraordinary catalytic at this exact moment by providing a slice of capital. This is what we do through Elemental, a slice of capital that is the nucleus of a project, that gets it rolling, that sets terms, that does all the homework, that does the underwriting, and then brings in foundations, brings in corporates, brings in banks, brings in infrastructure funders, all these other people to get projects funded. And I can give some examples. But this is a real moment, I think, around philanthropy. What we've seen this year is philanthropy has typically been very comfortable investing in advocacy and sort of like broad movement building and these other things. But now philanthropy is starting to realize that to have an impact in markets can have an enormous impact on emissions reductions. And that the markets are really the driving force of what's happening right now in climate, but they're not working well. There's a lot of market failures to making it work. And so philanthropy can be super surgical and strategic in helping catalyze some of those gaps, helping close some of those market gaps, build ecosystems that are thinking in different ways. Then it can have an enormous follow-on effect. So as one example, I mean, a typical elemental company, $1 of elemental funding has unlocked more than $100 of follow-on funding for those companies. So this is the way that like philanthropic capital, when applied in this very surgical way, can have an outsized impact. And so we're starting to just really see a wave of philanthropy being interested in how to engage there in solutions.
I would guess there's some listeners that are just thinking, what are you guys talking about? Why is philanthropy investing in for-profits and taking the type of risk that venture investors take? So let's make this more tangible. Tell us about some of the companies and projects that you've backed. And let's start with something that fit just the elemental bucket and is not part of Earthshot.
Yeah, it's a great question. Examples always help. So I'll give one example of a company called Nitricity that we funded. It's a company that creates a very low carbon fertilizer, liquid nitrogen fertilizer that's actually certified organic. They use renewable energy and a little bit of almond shells to create liquid nitrogen. So a huge game changer when right now most of our liquid nitrogen fertilizer comes from very large natural gas plants and is moved all over the US. But they can create these small community-based hubs that create organic and very low carbon fertilizer. So this is a company that Elemental first invested in several years ago with a plant in Fremont, California. And then as they were trying to build their 10x greater plant in the Central Valley in Delhi, California, they faced this exact capital gap that I've been talking about because the plant had a lot of scale up risk and technology risk perceived by investors. And so it's not a fit for most infrastructure funders. It also, the plant was about $10 million. So infrastructure funders are not going to sort of like get involved at that plant size typically. We see in this sort of missing middle of early projects, the biggest capital gap is under $100 million. It's just very hard to get people to sort of pick up the phone and start doing homework on that size of project. And so we were talking to Nitricity about this. Elemental put in a term sheet for $2 million to serve as the nucleus of that project funding. And then we were able to raise other people. Once we did the underwriting and did the homework on that, we were able to raise the rest of the $10 million for that facility to create the blueprint for raising equity and debt on the next several facilities. And that was really what investors wanted to see. That Nitricity was a Series A company at that point, but to unlock the Series B, investors wanted to see if they could get this plant financed. So once they saw that, Nitricity was able to raise an oversubscribed Series B in spring of 2025, right after we completed that financing. And interestingly, there's one other twist here, which is we made that investment not as a pure equity investment, but we've created a new financial tool called a development SAFE. It's actually quite simple. A SAFE is a simple agreement for future equity, which was developed by Y Combinator. And it was a way to invest in companies outside of priced rounds and without the debt of a convertible note. And it's been very widely adopted, and it really opened up early stage equity investing for startups in a very elegant way. So one of the challenges in these early projects is just enormous transaction costs of getting the projects done. So our team, knowing this, had worked with entrepreneurs to say, is there a simple way that we can create more alignment for these early projects and specifically for what's called development capital, which is really hard to get. So we created this development SAFE. It's just like a typical SAFE, except that also creates the opportunity for the entrepreneur to pay Elemental back with interest instead of rolling that on to their next equity round. And the value for us is we get to recycle capital faster, and it acts as essentially a synthetic development loan. And the value for the company is that it can be non-dilutive if the project goes forward. And so we can I get all the benefits of a development loan, but without actual debt of a convertible note, and creates really, really strong alignment between the entrepreneur and the funder, the investor. And so we've done 9 of these so far. Nitricity was one. And it was an example where after Nitricity raised their Series B, they paid Elemental back with interest. That was great for us because we can recycle that capital into the next project and serve as that super catalytic role. And Nitricity was able to make room for other investors in their cap table and also expand their employee option pool, which is what they wanted to do. And so it's really a win-win-win. And Elemental still has our skin in the game with Nitricity from an investment that we made several years ago. So that's sort of one example of what Elemental, the nonprofit, can do. And you couldn't really ever do that through an infrastructure fund or a venture fund because that's just not their mission. But Elemental's mission is to stay right on the edge of what we think is possible and either like create something new or sort of make an investment that can be super catalytic. And the last piece of the story is that we then made all the documents public. Our whole practitioners know all of our learnings from the case studies, the legal documents, everything. They've been downloaded hundreds and hundreds of times in the last couple months alone. And one of our goals for 2026 is to see other investors use this kind of tool and to try to create ways to build the field and make the field have less friction overall.
Love the innovative approach and, of course, the generosity and intent to be catalytic, not just with that one company, but with investing and climate finance overall. Matt, let's turn to you. Let's hear about some of the example Earthshot companies. I know that it's hard to pick favorites, so we'll just look for representative examples, but would love to make your portfolio tangible as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to tell you about a few companies. So if you judge by how much we've invested, not picking any favorites, but if you judge by how much we've invested, the first company to talk about is KoBold Metals. So KoBold Metals is a company that uses AI for mining, finding the deposits that are driving the energy transition. So nickel, copper, lithium, cobalt, rare earths. They do everything from digitizing decades old paper government records to flying a massive magnet over an area of interest to detect the electromagnetic signature. So they splice together these dozens of different data sources, and that enables them to make better decisions about where to look for the metals that are driving the energy transition. We love this business model because upstream exploration is where a lot of the value accrues in mining. A lot of mining deposits have been sold for billions of dollars before any mining ever actually happened and the mines were operational. So we invested in KoBold before they had found any deposits. They then subsequently found a massive copper deposit in Zambia, which they've announced has enough copper in it for roughly 100 million electric vehicles. So there's not a larger, higher grade, undeveloped copper deposit on the planet. So we're just extremely bullish on their ability to continue to find these deposits that are driving the energy transition and really be the best company in the world at finding those metals. Another company that I think is emblematic of our approach is a company called Etched. So Etched is a computer chip company. They specifically are developing chips for data centers that are specifically optimized for the transformer model architecture for AI. So you probably know the T and ChatGPT is for transformer. Today's leading AI chips were originally developed for video games. They have evolved to happen to be good at the type of matrix multiplication that underpins modern AI. But Etched made this bet that by building from the ground up for the transformer architecture, you could create chips that were not only faster and have higher throughput, but are also far more energy efficient, roughly 8 times more energy efficient than today's leading edge chips. So we think that makes them a climate bullseye for us, even though we're the only climate tech investor on the cap table.
Dawn, I'd love to circle back to you because I know that one of the things that's so exciting about the collaboration between Earthshot and Elemental is the opportunity for Elemental to be of service to some of the Earthshot portfolio. So curious if you have any examples to make that collaboration more tangible and help us understand what it's meant for some of your portfolio.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. One example of a company in the Earthshot portfolio that we really love is SuperCircle. SuperCircle is taking clothing and making it profitable for companies like Target and Reformation and others to recycle it. So about 60% of clothing goes into a landfill within 6 months. And some of it doesn't even reach people because it just gets over manufactured and there's too many mediums and they sold more larges or whatever the thing is. And So they've figured out how to help companies make money by recycling this. It's a giant problem, and we're really excited about the business. And as we've been working with SuperCircle through Earthshot, some really interesting opportunities have come up, in particular around the workforce potential for SuperCircle. They have a facility in Las Vegas, they're opening a facility in Los Angeles, and we're really interested in how do you bring more people from all backgrounds into sort of climate jobs. And like Matt said, we think of climate jobs pretty broadly. It's not just about installing solar panels, although of course there's a lot of jobs there, but it is about all these different segments. And so SuperCircle was embarking on a partnership with Homeboy Industries, which works with former gang members and formerly incarcerated folks, and is an amazing force in workforce in the Los Angeles area. And we saw an opportunity to lean in with Elemental. We have a whole team that works on workforce. How do you bring folks in? How do you work well with community partners? How do you maximize local impact and benefit across all kinds of projects? So it could be across geothermal, it could be across carbon dioxide removal, in this case, across sort of circular economy and manufacturing and new kind of manufacturing. And so at Elemental, we started working with SuperCircle and funding their project to specifically build out this workforce element. Really across our companies, we see a couple of challenges in common, no matter what the company is doing, what sector they're in. One is around financing and how do you finance the business and how do you preserve value for your venture investors while financing big things is one sort of theme. And the other is around workforce. How do you get the top talent, poach them out of other industries and bring them onto your team? And also, how do you support your workforce if you're, in the field drilling or if you're in other places? And so that's a place we've really leaned in at Elemental, and it's been pretty exciting to be able to support a company that's thinking about that really differently and doing something really different.
Don, the workforce implications of climate tech doesn't often come up in this conversation for me in the podcast, and it's exciting to hear about it. And I know that Elemental brings a broader lens around community and always has. Help us understand a bit more of how you bake that into your process and how you set priorities for things that are beyond, just the climate impacts of the companies that you invest in.
Yeah, it's part of our DNA and it has been since I started Elemental in Hawaii. I moved here in 2009. And it's part of just doing business successfully in Hawaii and it informed our thesis of technology may bring half the solution, the community brings the other half. And usually that's the people, that's the customers, that's the city. And so these two things have to work in concert for anything to scale in climate, because most of the climate companies, their water, their energy, their agriculture, their data centers, these things all happen in the real world. They're not just getting pushed out over software usually. And so that becomes a key element of success, and the social license to operate and grow your business is core to being an impactful company in the space. So the way we think about workforce is how can we partner with companies to take the best ideas and best models and help shortcut their ability to do it very well. So one example on the workforce front would be a company in the Elemental portfolio called Fervo, where they are building out the largest enhanced geothermal project in the world. It's in southern Utah. And there's a real opportunity to support and foster local economic development and the local workforce in the area. Not only people working directly at the plant, but all of the suppliers. They have dozens and dozens of suppliers in the area. And how do you sort of really support the workforce there? This one's interesting actually, because at the same time that Fervo started building out this plant and expanding their footprint in Utah, and I had the opportunity to go a couple of months ago, there was also a very large pork operation that had employed hundreds of people in that area. And it's a rural area, and that had shut down just as Fervo was expanding their footprint. And so they were able to hire some people out of that, but also bring other sort of economic development and activity to the cafes and the local businesses in the area, and also bring this real excitement and potential to young people and students. So we funded with Fervo and worked really closely with them to develop a apprenticeship program, working with the local university, and really the first kind of rural apprenticeship program of its kind. And our interest is how do we help support the workforce there, but also what can we learn from that to do rural workforce development across the country? And that's, again, like Elemental's role. We like to get real deep in a project So we actually really understand, what does it take to implement this? How do you do IP around the internship program? What does it take for the university to be successful? What are all the things that they want to do around internships and apprenticeships and building that out? But then also at the systems level, what does this mean for policy, for legislation? How can we take lessons learned to other places? How can we bring senators in on the story? And so that's always our sort of approach, is to get really deep in the details so we understand what's happening and how to unblock it and how to make something happen that wouldn't otherwise happen. And then how do you work at the systems level to have the broader change that we actually need here?
That sort of systems level thinking and that sort of intersectional approach is not just driving philanthropy and nonprofits, but it was parts of what we saw as really the intention behind things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And I know that you were deeply involved in both of those. And so I can only imagine that 2025 must have been a full year of emotion and challenge in some ways. Don, how would you sum up the year, thinking about all those things in context?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I actually came to this work because I started in policy. So unlike Matt, he's really started in VC, and on the private side, I started on the policy front. And as I was working, I was living in DC, and I was working on the launch of ARPA-E and working on these sort of like large policy initiatives at the state level and the national level. I started to see just the momentum that came from entrepreneurs building businesses and how that could sort of like break through some of the things we were even working on the policy front. And that's why I became really interested in how do you support and enable entrepreneurs building the things we want. But I've always been involved in policy for more than 15 years. I think I always will be. And we do see policy as an alpha in terms of investing. I don't think there's any point at which we're making an investment and we're like, oh, it's like not helpful to have a policy context in this investment, because even though we are usually investing in companies that don't depend on government for success, they're all like swimming in a policy ocean. So we're all sort of swimming in this broader regulatory framework, and knowing what's around the corner on legislation, being able to have access to people to share what's happening in technology, to connect entrepreneurs directly to policymakers in DC, to bring policymakers to projects on the ground and say, hey, look what's happening in your district. There's so much movement in your district around water, around clean energy. Look at what's happening here. That has always been a real advantage for us. So, whenever we sort of see things happening at the federal level or the state level that will have a real impact on innovation, we want to be at the table and helping shape that conversation about what's possible and how we can be as facilitative to entrepreneurs and innovation within that context as possible. And I mean, I recently released an op-ed around this because I've seen over time that policy is so often not informed by the latest that's happening in innovation. And right now, technology is moving faster than ever, and new technology is absolutely required to meet our climate goals. So the International Energy Agency estimates that somewhere between 35 and 46% of emissions reductions that we need will come from technologies that still need innovation, that still need commercialization work. So our sort of view is that having a policy lens to this, making sure that we are empowering and embracing innovation and entrepreneurs as part of our policy agenda, has always just been really top of mind for our work at Elemental and informs our work at Earthshot as well.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, especially with some of the sectors that we're most interested in right now at Earthshot and that we've invested 2025. AI is one of them. There's obviously such an important conversation happening right now about how much are we going to regulate AI? Are we going to try to slow down building data centers? Another one of the most important spaces, I talked about KoBold, metals and mining, sort of thinking about the geopolitics of metals and mining is extremely important. And then we're also really increasingly starting to be interested in space-oriented investing. And a lot of space companies are going to have dual use applications. And so these spaces that we're investing in, where technology is interacting with the real world, not just the world of bits, but the world of atoms, tend to have an especially strong policy overlay. And so having the Elemental lens on top of the traditional Earthshot venture lens is really helpful for us in terms of getting access to interesting companies and being able to help them after we've made the investment.
And I would say too, like what we've seen from our Earthshot and Elemental entrepreneurs is they're so hungry to talk to policymakers in the right venues, in the right ways, and have so many good ideas. But they also don't usually have like a full-time policy person on their team until they're maybe 40 or 50 people. So having eyes and ears, having intel about where they can plug in that's most effective is so valuable. And the same thing's true for policymakers. They're so hungry to know what is the art of the possible? How can we support entrepreneurs in a different way? And, every time we've facilitated these conversations, had roundtables with entrepreneurs, brought senators or reps into these conversations, usually they come away and they're just like, my mind is blown by what is happening in innovation and how quickly it's moving. So I think the more we facilitate that, it's a win-win-win and it makes us all better.
One of the implications, of course, of turbulence or change or any sort of shift in the policy environment is that it creates uncertainty, which for investors can be pretty unsettling. And Dawn, I know that you spent a lot of time this year talking with donors and investors. What have you been hearing? What's on their minds, and how are you seeing this market amidst all the changes over the last year?
Yeah, what we've seen this year is, I do think the early part of 2025, there was a lot of apprehension about how to make any moves and a lot of sort of strategy rethinking from philanthropy and donors and investors. And I will say, even at Earthshot, we really were circumspect about investing in late 2024 and early 2025 when there was so much change happening in the market. And we invested across some places where we saw like very clear momentum, specifically in AI and critical minerals. But otherwise, we were really careful. I think what happened in mid 2025 is we sort of saw the flop. I don't know if you're a poker player, Jason, but we saw the cards. We know now what the policy framework is, and we know the space that we're operating in. And I think it's a time to move pretty boldly into sort of what's next. And we have seen that change with philanthropy and investors in terms of being able to move faster. I've been, in particular, really excited about the sort of reception and understanding from philanthropy this last couple of months. I think we still have a ways to go, but I think what is happening is this broader recognition about the role that philanthropy can play in building an environmental movement that embraces innovation rather than one that is more focused on how to stop bad projects from happening. There are not
That's
perfect
a big statement
projects.
and potentially a whole episode on itself, but a lot to dive into there. Yes. So you're seeing momentum in that direction, that philanthropy is embracing innovation in a new way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a patchwork, but we're also seeing a lot of work still much more narrow in just like solar, wind, electric vehicles, batteries, and a lot of trouble breaking out of those specific technology areas. And so that's where a lot of my conversations have been lately is how do we get comfortable? How do we help philanthropy and others get not only comfortable with carbon dioxide removal and new kinds of fertilizers and agricultural innovation, with geothermal that uses some of the same technology that came from fracking, with other, with mining in the sort of for critical minerals and the transition, all these other things, which are not perfect. They will have some impacts. But overall, what we're looking for to solve climate is we need to build a lot of big things. We need to move very aggressively, and we need to look for the presence of strength, just like we do in venture, not necessarily every single thing being perfect as we go. So that is a very live conversation that I'm having with a lot of philanthropy folks right now. And maybe I'll just like circle back to the KoBold example that Matt gave, because I think it's important to realize, he mentioned this big discovery, Mingomba in Zambia. I think it's important to recognize a couple things. One, that discovery is in an existing mining region, basically under an old copper mine. It's just that new technology enabled a way to find where the very high grade resources. So if you have better information about where resources are, you can make way better decisions about the environmental impact of where you're drilling and go into less environmentally sensitive areas. Also, if you can find way higher grade ore, in this case, 10 times higher grade than many of the other sort of deposits that are being mined, you're have 10 times less waste when you're mining that ore. So the technology here has these other sort of follow-on effects that do have environmental benefit. But overall, you kind of have to get comfortable that mining is something, if you want electric vehicles, if you want solar, if you want new transmission technologies or fusion, all these different things, these require these kinds of metals. And we want these things, we don't only need them, but we need them at low cost. So we need metals that are coming in at low cost because they're big cost drivers for these kinds of technologies. So if we're going to address affordability, we have to have really intellectually consistent, honest conversations about the wide spectrum of technologies that are needed, and then work super closely with entrepreneurs to hold them to a high standard. And this is not sort of an excuse of, oh, we're going to break a lot of eggs and I guess that's how it's going to be. No, we're going to hold people to super high standards. We want to work with them. We want to be partners. Matt mentioned we're often the only climate or environmental investor on the cap table. I mean, we're lifelong in this space. We're going to be beating this drum the whole time. But that's what we think is needed. And that's what we think the opportunity now is in innovation.
Matt, 2026. I don't know if you can see the flop or just see the future in a crystal ball. Tell us what you see for the new year.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of those spaces that we've been investing in this year, and I think that's going to be a great preview of what we're looking to do next year as well. I think those spaces that I mentioned all have an extremely strong why now. I think AI is the strongest why now since the internet. The underlying technological improvements just create a constant tailwind for AI native companies and companies that are accelerating the AI economy. So we're going to continue to double down in that world. We are also going to continue doubling down in space. The declining cost of transporting payloads to space is opening a new frontier of dual use companies with climate tech applications. So we made our first investment in space earlier this year in a company called Hubble Network, which is connecting just everyday Bluetooth devices to their satellite network just with a simple over-the-air firmware update, which has really big implications for remote connectivity. So again, I don't think they would probably call themselves a climate tech company. We're the only climate tech investor on the cap table. But for things like remote agriculture or wildfire monitoring, it's extremely valuable. I thought this one was going to be actually more of a sort of debate on the impact angle in our investment committee. But John, maybe you can jump in and talk a little bit about what you saw through the years at Elemental and why you thought this was such a good fit.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, when we brought this one to investment committee, this has been such a challenge for so many of the climate companies that we've seen trying to scale over the last 15 years is just remote connectivity. And so our sort of thinking was, if there's a company that can bring a new tool set here, and we know a lot of the companies in energy, distributed energy, in transportation, in ag, in natural resource management that are having this struggle, we can get them to the front of the line of a technology like this. That's a place where we could have real impact on helping some of these companies succeed. To have low cost communications in remote areas is an unlock for many of the companies that I've invested in over the last 15 years.
Another area we're going to be focused on is robotics. So we just on Wednesday sort of made what I would say is our first robotics investment. And over the last decade, there's been so much progress with smartphones, autonomous vehicles, drones, and energy storage. And all of those supply chains, I think, are combining to make robotics a really interesting place to invest right now, helping augment some of those dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs that people are out there doing every day. And yeah, another fun fact about that one that we just made is it was an Elemental company. And, that Elemental relationship was really crucial in helping us get access to the round in the first place. So I think there's enough Elemental companies out there that I can say that without giving away who exactly it is, but just a really fun tie-in between the two organizations.
You brought us full circle. Don, let's leave off with you. You work at a systemic level, engaging in policy, thinking about market failures and climate finance. How do you see 2026 and what work needs to be done this year?
Yeah, there's so much needs to be done this year in 2026. I think from my vantage point and sort of specifically the two hats that I wear at Elemental and Earthshot, we're really excited about the venture capital landscape for 2026. We think it's a really good market to be investing VC. And I mentioned that we experienced an inflection point of founder quality in the 2019, 2020 timeframe coming into climate. I think a lot of that was driven by orange skies over San Francisco and just like a lot of climate disasters in 2018, 2019 that woke people up that climate is happening now. We've seen another inflection point in the last 6 months in terms of founder quality coming into climate. And I think what's happened is that a lot of the first wave of sort of AI companies coming out of the ChatGPT launch were focused on foundation models and other kinds of things in AI building. But we've seen over the last 6 months is founders with deep expertise in energy and building, taking those AI toolkits and sort of playbooks to a new level and applying them to infrastructure in these really interesting ways. And that's a lot of the investments we've made in the last few months is how do you apply AI to solving these really gnarly infrastructure and energy challenges. And so this feels like an incredibly exciting time to be investing in that space. And so I'm super bullish, like Matt, on investing in 2026. So I want to see more climate investment. I want to see more allocators who are just looking for the best returns, looking to climate to deliver that. I also think, the IPO window is going to open. And so we're going to start seeing more liquidity in the space, and that will be helpful more broadly in the venture context. I guess the second thing I would say beyond venture is that what I've also learned in a pretty acute way in the last few years is something that I had an instinct for before, but has become very clear, which is not every opportunity is a good fit for VC. And we need other kinds of capital to complement VC to address climate. We can't just be funding all of the screws and cement pours and steel construction with venture capital dollars. That is not a scalable way to address climate. And so what I also see the need for in 2026 is more philanthropy leaning into and helping leading markets and shaping markets and helping address these capital gaps. I mentioned, I think we're seeing some good momentum there, but I think 2026 is poised to be a breakout moment for philanthropy being bold and taking some risks and trying new things in that space. So I feel very optimistic there. And I guess the final thing, I'll just come to full circle with my word for 2026, which is Audacity. It's been a challenging year, but some systems can get stronger under stress. I think we've built a couple of organizations that do get stronger under stress. And we have many more tools to address this. We have a lot of conviction that we're doing the right thing. So the science is real. We need to solve climate. And even with all the headwinds, there's a lot we can do. So we wake up every day and thinking like, what can we do? What can we uniquely do in this space? And then we're just going after that with unbridled conviction right now.
Dawn, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. All the best of luck for 2026.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.